There's a plant growing legally in Pennsylvania right now, in the same fields it grew in 300 years ago, that can fuel your diesel truck, your gasoline car, your generator, and your tractor. All of them. No engine modifications, no mechanic, no gas station. And in 2010, a university laboratory proved it works at 97% efficiency. When you understand what that number means, you will understand exactly why this plant was made illegal in 1937 and who made sure you never found out. Stay with me, because this story starts not in a lab or a courtroom, but in a barn in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Every winter, millions of people do the same thing. They watch the price on the gas pump climb, they pay it, they drive away, and they never once ask who decided it had to work this way. Why petroleum? Why now? Why always more expensive? The infrastructure is so complete, so deeply embedded in daily life that questioning it feels almost absurd. You need fuel. You go to the station. That is just how the world works. Except it was not always how it worked. And for one community in the Pennsylvania countryside, it still is not. A few years ago, I drove out to East Hempfield Township, a place named, as it turns out, for a very specific reason, to meet a farmer named Reuben. Quiet man, firm handshake. He said almost nothing for the first 10 minutes, just walked me to the back of his barn and pulled a glass jar off a wooden shelf. The liquid inside looked like cooking oil, pale yellow, slightly thick. He poured it directly into a small diesel tractor without ceremony, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. The engine started on the first pull. No hesitation, no smoke, no rough idle. I stood there for a full 15 minutes waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing did. When I finally asked where he had purchased the fuel, Reuben looked at me with genuine confusion. Then he pointed to the field behind the barn. "I grew it," he said. That was the moment everything I thought I understood about energy independence changed. The plant is industrial hemp, cannabis sativa. And before your mind goes anywhere complicated, let me be direct. Industrial hemp contains less than 0.3% THC, the compound that produces psychoactive effects. You could not get high from it if you tried. It is federally legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, as legal to grow as corn, wheat, or soybeans. But for 80 years before that bill was signed, it was treated as a controlled narcotic. And the reason had nothing to do with anyone getting high. It had everything to do with fuel. Here's the science, and I promise it is simpler than it sounds. Hemp seeds contain roughly 30 to 35% oil by weight. That oil is extracted using a cold press, the same basic machine people use for olive oil. Once you have the oil, you convert it to biodiesel through a process called transesterification. You mix the hemp oil with methanol and a small amount of lye. The mixture reacts and separates into two layers. The top layer is raw biodiesel. The bottom layer is glycerin, useful for soap. You wash the biodiesel, let it dry, and you can pour it directly into any diesel engine ever manufactured. No modifications, no special injectors, nothing. Because here is what most people do not know. Rudolf Diesel never designed his engine to run on petroleum. When he patented the compression ignition engine in 1892, the fuel he envisioned was plant oil. In 1900, he demonstrated it at the World Exposition in Paris using peanut oil from French agricultural colonies. The engine ran so quietly, so cleanly, that spectators could not believe it was burning vegetable matter. Diesel wrote publicly that his engine would help farmers grow their own fuel and free them from industrial dependency. He called it the oil engine, and he meant oil from the ground, just not from that deep underground. Then he vanished. On the night of September 29th, 1913, Diesel boarded a steamship in Antwerp heading for England, ate dinner, retired to his cabin, and was never seen alive again. His hat and overcoat were found folded near the stern railing. 10 days later, a Dutch fishing crew pulled a body from the North Sea. His son identified the personal effects. The newspapers could not agree on a cause. Some said suicide. Others ran darker headlines. His wife opened a travel bag he had given her before departure. Inside was cash and financial statements showing their accounts were nearly empty. In his diary, a cross had been drawn on the date of his disappearance. We may never know what happened. What we do know is what happened after. Within a decade of his death, every diesel engine in the world was running on petroleum. The engine designed to liberate farmers became the machine that bound them to an oil company. And the man who might have fought to keep it plant-powered was at the bottom of the English Channel. Now, diesel engines are only half the story. What about your car, your lawnmower, your chainsaw? This is where the second fuel enters the picture, and where Henry Ford comes in. After you press hemp seeds for oil, you still have the entire stalk, thousands of pounds per acre of cellulose-rich fibrous material. That cellulose can be broken down into simple sugars through a process called cellulolysis. Those sugars are fermented. Fermentation produces ethanol, the same type of alcohol already blended into the gasoline you're buying at the pump today. Every gallon of regular American gas already contains up to 10% ethanol. It is called E10. The only difference is that the commercial ethanol comes from corn. Hemp produces it from the leftover stalk of a plant that already gave you biodiesel from its seeds. One plant, two fuels, two engine types, zero waste. Ford understood this in the 1920s. His Model T was engineered to run on gasoline, ethanol, or any combination. He told the New York Times in 1925 that the fuel of the future would come from farms, from weeds, from fruit, from agricultural byproducts. By the 1930s, he was funding conferences and operating a biomass conversion plant in Michigan that processed hemp into methanol, charcoal fuel, and industrial chemicals. In 1941, he unveiled a prototype car with body panels made from hemp, soy, and flax, panels lighter than fiberglass that did not dent when he swung an axe at them on camera. The car was designed to run on hemp ethanol. Ford was 77 years old when he stood there with that axe, believing he was showing the world the future. But by 1941, the future had already been buried 4 years earlier. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was signed into law. Notice the specific word chosen, marijuana. Not cannabis, a term every physician would have recognized. Not hemp, a term every farmer understood. The word selected was Mexican slang, deliberately unfamiliar, chosen to sever the connection between a widely known agricultural crop and the legislation designed to eliminate it. Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led the campaign. Before taking the job, he had publicly stated that claims about cannabis causing violence were absurd. He knew better. But Prohibition had ended in 1933, and the department he ran was about to lose its purpose. He needed a new target. Cannabis became that target. And he had allies who needed it gone for business reasons that had nothing to do with public safety. William Randolph Hearst owned newspaper chains and timber mills across the country. Hemp produced paper faster and cheaper than wood pulp. The DuPont family had just patented nylon. Hemp fiber competed directly. Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury, wealthiest man in America, and Anslinger's father-in-law, who had personally appointed him, had invested heavily in DuPont. And then there was Standard Oil. Hemp as fuel was an existential threat to petroleum. These men did not need to operate in secret. They had newspapers, Congress, and a federal bureau. Hearst's papers ran front-page stories connecting marijuana to violence and crime. Anslinger testified before Congress with cases that carried no medical evidence. The American Medical Association sent a representative to formally oppose the act on scientific grounds. His testimony was dismissed. The act passed on August 2, 1937, with almost no public notice. And that same year, 2,000 fuel stations across the American Midwest were selling a product called Agrol, an ethanol gasoline blend made from fermented grain at a plant in Atchison, Kansas. Two blends were available. Agrol 5 had 5 to 7% alcohol content. Agrol 10 ran up to 17%. The brochure said, "Try a tankful, you'll be thankful." Customers did try it. They came back. The fuel worked. Then the sabotage started. Petroleum industry lobbying killed 19 federal bills and 31 state bills that could have supported alcohol fuel blending between 1933 and 1939. The Atchison plant closed its doors. Within 24 months of the Marijuana Tax Act, an entire farmer-built fuel infrastructure was gone. Same war, two different weapons, one winner. 5 months after the law passed, Popular Mechanics published a headline article calling hemp a new billion-dollar crop. The editors described new processing machines that could unlock the plant's full industrial potential across textiles, materials, food, and fuel. They called it the standard fiber of the world. They did not know the law had already passed. By the time that issue hit newsstands, it was already illegal to grow the crop it celebrated. The future was announced at its own funeral, and no one in the room knew it. Here at Hidden Fix Lab, this is the kind of history that matters. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is actionable. The 2018 Farm Bill restored what 1937 took away. You can legally grow, press, and process hemp in the United States today. If you own any diesel engine, a truck, a generator, a water pump, you can run it on biodiesel made from hemp seed oil right now. You purchase cold-pressed hemp seed oil in bulk. You build a basic reactor from a used electric water heater for under $300. Plans are freely available online. The University of Connecticut ran this exact chemistry in 2010. Professor Richard Parnas and his team processed virgin hemp seed oil through standard transesterification and measured 97% conversion to biodiesel. It passed both American and European biodiesel quality standards. It also showed unexpectedly strong cold weather performance, outperforming other biodiesel options at low temperatures. Parnas told reporters that a farmer growing hemp could potentially produce enough biodiesel to power their entire operation from the seeds alone. For gasoline engines, the federal government issues a free fuel alcohol permit through the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. You apply, you get approved, and you can legally distill ethanol for motor fuel on your own property. A small fermentation tank and a basic still are all the equipment required. The ethanol you produce blends at 10 to 15% with regular gasoline and works in any standard engine without a single modification. because that is exactly what E10 and E15 already are. You would simply be making your own supply instead of buying it from someone else. 1 acre of hemp produces roughly 700 pounds of grain that yields approximately 20 gallons of biodiesel, enough to run a diesel generator for weeks. That same acre produces over 5,000 pounds of stalk, both fuels from one harvest on one piece of land. A few realistic notes. Ethanol production at home requires careful temperature control during fermentation and proper storage to prevent contamination. Biodiesel should be filtered thoroughly before use in any modern common rail diesel engine, as some systems are more sensitive to fuel viscosity than older mechanical injection engines. Start with a small batch and test before committing a full tank. And always verify your local regulations alongside the federal permit. State rules vary. The Amish in Lancaster County did not need a university study or a government program to understand any of this. They had grown the plant since 1710. When the 1937 law took it from them, they adapted, switched to tobacco, expanded dairy, grew corn like everyone else. But the knowledge did not disappear. It stayed in barn conversations and kitchen table discussions, passed from grandfather to grandson without anyone writing it in a journal. Other Americans forgot the plant existed. The Amish simply waited. They are patient people. They have outlasted every trend, every fad, every government program designed to change how they live. When the 2018 Farm Bill passed, Amish farmers in Lancaster County were among the first in the country to move, because they never needed anyone to explain what was possible. Rudolph Diesel built an engine for farmers and vanished from a ship. Henry Ford built a car from crops and watched the law bury it. 2,000 stations sold plant-based fuel to Midwest drivers and were strategically destroyed. A magazine celebrated a $1 billion crop 5 months after the law that killed it. And for 80 years, a community in Pennsylvania quietly kept the knowledge alive. You were not supposed to know the 97%. You were not supposed to know about the 2,000 stations, or the magazine that arrived after the funeral, or the engine that was taken from plant oil and handed to petroleum. You were supposed to keep driving to the pump, watching the number climb, and never think to ask who decided it had to be that way. The Amish answered that question with a seed 3 centuries ago. Now you have the same answer. What you do with it is entirely up to you. If you could grow 1 acre of hemp this season, what would you fuel first? Your truck, your generator, or your tractor? Drop it in the comments. Every answer shapes what Hidden Fix Lab covers next.